Blood-soaked and trembling, Fiona Nelson stumbled out of her father's grand house in Cottonwood Springs, Colorado, the bitter autumn wind of 1875 carrying his final words to her. "You're dead to me now, girl." 20 years old and cast out like yesterday's trash, she clutched her shawl tighter around her shoulders, the weight of her unshed tears heavier than the small bundle of belongings she'd managed to grab before her father had thrown her onto the street. The scandal that had engulfed her family these past weeks had finally reached its inevitable conclusion. Falsely accused of stealing from her father's business partner and bringing shame upon the Nelson name, Fiona had professed her innocence until her voice grew hoarse. But Judge Harrison Nelson, the most respected man in Cottonwood Springs, had already made up his mind. His daughter was guilty not of theft, but of defying him by refusing to marry the aging banker he'd chosen for her. Now she stood on the edge of town as the sun sank below the distant mountains, casting long shadows across the dusty Main Street. With nowhere to go and winter approaching, Fiona's options were few. The respectable women of town would close their doors to her, not wishing to incur the judge's wrath. The saloon would offer work, but of a kind that would truly make her the fallen woman her father accused her of being. Fiona straightened her spine and blinked back her tears. She would not give her father the satisfaction of breaking her. With determined steps, she headed toward the livery stable at the edge of town. Perhaps she could convince old Mr. Gunderson to let her sleep in the hayloft, just for tonight, until she could figure out what to do next. As she approached the weathered building, the sound of hammering drew her attention. A tall man stood in the doorway, his broad shoulders silhouetted against the warm light spilling from inside. She hesitated, not recognizing him as anyone from town. "Stable's closed," he called out, his voice deep and gravelly. "Gunderson's gone to Denver to see his sister, won't be back for a month." Fiona's heart sank. "Please, sir," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "I just need a place to sleep for the night. I can work to pay for it." The man stepped forward, and in the fading light, she could see his face weathered and tanned, with sharp blue eyes beneath the brim of a worn Stetson. He wasn't much older than she was, maybe 25 or 26, but there was something in his eyes that spoke of years spent facing the harshness of the frontier. "Miss Nelson?" he asked, recognition dawning on his face. Fiona stiffened. Of course he knew who she was. Everyone in this wretched town knew the judge's daughter, and by tomorrow, everyone would know of her disgrace. "Yes," she admitted, lifting her chin slightly. "Though I don't believe we've met, Mr. Wade Keller," he replied, touching the brim of his hat. "I bought the stable from Gunderson last week. Been meaning to introduce myself around town, but I've been busy fixing this place up." He studied her face, his gaze lingering on the red mark on her cheek where her father's ring had caught her skin. "You in some kind of trouble, Miss Nelson?" Fiona hesitated. The truth would come out soon enough, but she couldn't bring herself to speak the words. "I find myself temporarily without lodging," she said carefully. Wade Keller's mouth twitched, not quite a smile. "That's a fancy way of saying you need a place to stay." He glanced at her small bundle of possessions, then back at her face. "Your father know you're out wandering around after dark?" The question hit her like a physical blow. "My father," she said, her voice cracking slightly, "has made it quite clear that my whereabouts are no longer his concern." Something in Wade's expression changed, a hardness coming into his eyes. "I see." He stepped aside, gesturing toward the door of the stable. "Well, I can't offer much in the way of comfort, but there's a clean bed in the loft, and I was just about to make some coffee. You're welcome to both." Fiona hesitated. A young woman alone with a strange man, it was precisely the sort of situation her father had always warned her against. But what choice did she have? "I don't accept charity, Mr. Keller," she said stiffly. "Good," he replied, his expression unreadable. "Because I'm not offering any. Gunderson left this place in a state. I could use help getting it organized. You work for your keep and we'll call it square." Relief washed over her, followed quickly by suspicion. "And you'd hire a woman you don't know just like that?" Wade Keller's mouth curved into a half-smile. "Miss Nelson, I've been riding the trails since I was 16. I've learned to size people up pretty quick. You look like someone who's had a bad turn of luck, not someone looking for handouts." He paused, then added quietly, "And whatever's happened between you and your father, I reckon that's your business." Fiona studied him for a moment, then nodded. "Thank you, Mr. Keller, I accept your offer." The interior of the stable was warmer than outside, the familiar smell of hay and horses oddly comforting. Wade led her to a small room at the back that served as living quarters. A wood stove in the corner gave off welcome heat, and a pot of coffee simmered on top. "It's not much," he said, suddenly seeming a bit self-conscious, "but it's dry and warm." "It's perfect," Fiona replied honestly. As she sipped the strong coffee he offered her, Fiona found herself studying Wade Keller more carefully. His clothes were well worn but clean, his movements efficient and sure. He wasn't handsome in the conventional way of the dandies who frequented her father's house, but there was something compelling about his rugged features and direct gaze. "You said you bought the stable," she ventured. "Are you planning to settle in Cottonwood Springs?" Wade nodded, pouring himself a cup of coffee. "That's the plan, been drifting long enough, figured it was time to put down some roots." He sat across from her at the small table. "What about you, Miss Nelson? What are your plans now?" The simple question unleashed a flood of uncertainty that Fiona had been holding at bay. I don't know," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "Until today, my future seemed quite settled." And now, Fiona looked down at her hands, clasped tightly around the tin cup. "Now everything's changed." Wade didn't press for details, and she was grateful for his silence. They finished their coffee, and he showed her to the loft where she would sleep, providing her with extra blankets against the night's chill. "Get some rest," he told her. "Tomorrow will look better." But as Fiona lay in the darkness, listening to the occasional stamp and snort of the horses below, she wondered if anything would ever look better again. Morning came with golden light filtering through the cracks in the stable walls. Fiona woke stiff but rested, momentarily disoriented by her surroundings. Then memory flooded back her father's rage, the painful accusation, the door slamming behind her. She sat up, smoothing her rumpled dress as best she could. She would need to find a way to get more of her belongings or purchase new ones. But that required money, something she now lacked entirely. Her father had always controlled the purse strings tightly, providing her with an allowance befitting her station, but ensuring she never had enough to establish any independence. The smell of bacon frying drew her down the ladder from the loft. Wade stood at the small stove, his back to her as he tended to breakfast. "Good morning," she said, suddenly shy. He turned, and she was struck again by the directness of his blue gaze. "Morning, sleep all right?" "Yes, thank you." He nodded toward the table where plates and utensils were already set out. "Breakfast's almost ready, then I thought I'd show you what needs doing around here." They ate in companionable silence, and Fiona found herself relaxing slightly. There was something reassuring about Wade Keller's quiet presence, his lack of prying questions. After breakfast, he showed her around the stable, explaining his plans for expanding the business. "Cottonwood Springs is growing," he said. "With the new silver mine opening up north and the railroad coming through next year, there'll be more need for good horses and a reliable livery." As they worked side by side throughout the day, Fiona organizing the tack room while Wade repaired stalls, she found herself sharing pieces of her story. Not everything, not the deepest hurts, but enough that he began to understand. "My father has always been controlling," she explained as they took a break for lunch. "But I never thought he would go this far. He wanted me to marry Mr. Hollister, the banker." Wade's eyebrows rose. "Edgar Hollister, he must be nearly 50. 53, Fiona confirmed, "and twice widowed. My father said it would be a good match, secure my future and strengthen his business ties." She looked down at her hands. "When I refused, he became furious. Then Mr. Hollister's gold watch went missing and somehow the blame fell on me." "Did you take it?" Wade asked bluntly. Fiona's head snapped up, her eyes flashing. Of course not. I would never. She stopped at the sight of his slight smile. You're testing me. Just checking, he said. For what it's worth, I believe you. Your father strikes me as the type of man who doesn't take well to being defied. No, Fiona agreed softly. He doesn't. As the days passed, Fiona settled into a routine at the stable. The work was hard but satisfying, so different from the decorative existence she'd led as Judge Nelson's daughter. Wade proved to be a patient teacher, showing her how to care for the horses and manage the books of the business. News of her disgrace spread through town, of course. When Fiona ventured to the general store for supplies, she felt the weight of disapproving stares and heard the hushed whispers behind her back. But she held her head high, refusing to be cowed by the town's judgment. Wade, she noticed, never seemed affected by the gossip. When customers came to the stable and expressed surprise at seeing her there, he simply introduced her as his assistant and carried on with business. His matter-of-fact acceptance gave her courage. A week after her arrival at the stable, Fiona was brushing down a chestnut mare when the stable door opened, admitting a gust of cold air and a familiar figure. "Fiona Nelson," said Mrs. Abernathy, the minister's wife, her thin face pinched with disapproval. "I thought the rumors must be exaggerated, but here you are, living in sin with this drifter." Fiona's cheeks flamed. "I am not living in sin, Mrs. Abernathy. I am employed by Mr. Keller as his assistant." "A respectable young woman doesn't live under the same roof as an unmarried man," Mrs. Abernathy replied coldly. "Your poor father is heartbroken by your behavior." "My father," Fiona said evenly, "cast me out without a penny or a place to go. Mr. Keller offered me honest work when no one else would." Mrs. Abernathy sniffed. "Well, I've come to offer you a solution. The Ladies' Aid Society has taken up a collection to send you to my cousin in Denver. She runs a home for fallen women where you can learn useful skills and perhaps, in time, rehabilitate your reputation." Fiona stared at the older woman, momentarily speechless with outrage. Before she could respond, Wade's voice came from behind her. "Mrs. Abernathy," he said, his tone deceptively mild, "Miss Nelson isn't in need of charity or rehabilitation. She's an employee of this establishment and doing a fine job of it." Mrs. Abernathy drew herself up. "Mr. Keller, you are new to our community, so perhaps you don't understand the standards we maintain here. Judge Nelson is a pillar of this town, and he threw his daughter out like trash," Wade interrupted, his voice hardening. "That tells me all I need to know about the judge's character and the standards of this town." Mrs. Abernathy gasped. "Well, I never thank you for your concern," Fiona cut in, finding her voice at last, "but I must decline your offer. Please tell the Ladies' Aid Society that I appreciate their interest in my welfare, but I am quite satisfied with my current situation." After Mrs. Abernathy had departed in a flutter of indignation, Fiona turned to Wade. "You shouldn't have antagonized her," she said, though she couldn't suppress a small smile. "She'll make sure everyone in town knows what a terrible influence you are," Wade shrugged, his eyes twinkling. "I reckon my reputation can handle it." That evening, as they sat by the stove eating the stew Fiona had prepared, Wade asked quietly, "Was Mrs. Abernathy right about one thing? Do you want to go to Denver? There'd be more opportunities for a young woman like you in the city." Fiona looked up, surprised by the question and the trace of uncertainty she heard in his voice. "Do you want me to leave?" "No," he said quickly, then looked a bit embarrassed at his vehemence. "But I don't want you to stay out of lack of options either." Fiona considered his words carefully. "I'm not staying because I have nowhere else to go," she said finally. "I'm staying because, for the first time in my life, I'm doing something useful, something that matters, and because—" She hesitated, then met his gaze directly, "because I feel respected here." Wade's expression softened. "You are respected, Fiona. More than that, you're valued." The weeks turned into a month, and as November gave way to December, Cottonwood Springs prepared for Christmas. The stable business thrived under their combined efforts, and Fiona found herself genuinely happy despite her estrangement from her father and the continued cold shoulder from much of the town. She and Wade had fallen into an easy partnership, their initial awkwardness giving way to comfortable companionship. They shared meals and conversation, worked side by side during the day, and in the evenings, Wade taught her to play chess on a battered old set he'd carried with him in his travels. Fiona couldn't pinpoint exactly when her feelings for Wade began to change, when gratitude and friendship deepened into something more. Perhaps it was the day he returned from a trip to a neighboring town with a bolt of blue fabric that matched her eyes, insisting she use it to make herself a new dress. Or maybe it was the night a fierce blizzard howled around the stable, and they sat by the stove reading aloud to each other from his dog-eared copy of The Three Musketeers. All she knew was that she found herself watching him when he wasn't looking, admiring the way his hands moved confidently over a horse's flank, or how his rare, full smile transformed his serious face. She wondered if he felt the same, sometimes catching him looking at her with an expression she couldn't quite decipher. 2 weeks before Christmas, disaster struck. Fiona was alone at the stable, Wade having ridden out to deliver a horse to a ranch 10 miles north, when the door burst open and Edgar Hollister stormed in, his florid face contorted with rage. "There you are, you little thief," he bellowed, advancing on her with raised fist. Fiona backed away, her heart pounding. "Mr. Hollister, I don't know what you're talking about, my watch," he spat. "The one you stole. Your father may be too soft to press charges, but I'm not. The sheriff's on his way, and this time you'll face justice." Fiona's mind raced. The missing watch had been the pretext for her father's final break with her, but she had assumed it was merely a convenient excuse. Now, facing Hollister's genuine rage, she realized he truly believed she had taken it. "Mr. Hollister, I swear to you, I never took your watch." "I've never stolen anything in my life." "Liar," he shouted, grabbing her arm roughly. "You took it the day you were in my office with your father when you pretended to feel faint and asked for a glass of water. I left you alone for 2 minutes, and when I returned, you were looking guilty as sin." Fiona's eyes widened as understanding dawned. "I wasn't looking guilty, I was looking uncomfortable because you'd left your ledger open on the desk, and I'd seen something I shouldn't have." Hollister's grip tightened painfully. "What are you talking about?" "The second set of books," Fiona said, the pieces finally falling into place. "You're embezzling from the bank, aren't you? That's why you needed to marry me, to secure my father's protection when the truth eventually came out. And when I refused, you needed another way to control him, so you claimed I'd stolen from you." Hollister's face drained of color, then flushed an even deeper red. "You little—" His hand drew back to strike her, touch her again, "and it'll be the last thing you do." Wade's voice, cold as ice, came from the doorway. He stood there, rifle in hand, his expression more dangerous than Fiona had ever seen it. Hollister released Fiona's arm and turned to face Wade. "This is none of your business, Keller. This woman is a thief, and I'm having her arrested." "No, she isn't," came another voice, and Sheriff Tucker stepped into the stable behind Wade. "But you, Hollister, have some explaining to do." It emerged that Wade, returning early from his errand, had encountered the sheriff on the road and, concerned by the man's hurried manner, had accompanied him back to town. They'd arrived just in time to hear Fiona's accusation about the embezzlement. "I've had suspicions about Hollister's accounts for months," Sheriff Tucker admitted as they sat in the stable's small office after Hollister had been taken away in handcuffs. "But without proof, and with Judge Nelson backing him so strongly, there wasn't much I could do." "Why would my father support him if he suspected something was wrong?" Fiona asked, still shaken by the confrontation. The sheriff looked uncomfortable. "Your father's invested heavily in Hollister's bank. If it went under, he'd lose everything. I reckon he was hoping to protect his investment long enough to quietly withdraw his funds. And I was the sacrifice," Fiona said bitterly. Better to let his daughter be branded a thief than risk his fortune. Wade's hand covered hers on the table, warm and reassuring. "It's over now," he said quietly. "Hollister will face justice and your name will be cleared." The sheriff nodded. "Judge Nelson's at the courthouse now, giving a statement. Miss Nelson, he asked if you would come see him. I think he wants to make amends." Fiona looked at Wade, uncertainty in her eyes. "It's your decision," he told her. "Whatever you choose, I'm with you." The simple declaration, spoken without hesitation, gave her courage. "I'll see him," she decided, "but not alone." Judge Harrison Nelson had aged a decade in the month since Fiona had last seen him. He sat behind his desk in the courthouse, his once imposing figure somehow diminished. When Fiona entered, Wade a steady presence beside her, the judge rose to his feet. "Fiona," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "My girl." She remained in the doorway, unwilling to step closer. "You called me a liar and a thief," she said. "You threw me out without a penny or a place to go. You chose your business interests over your own daughter." The judge flinched at each accusation. "I was wrong," he admitted, the words seeming to cost him physically. "Terribly, unforgivably wrong. When Hollister first suggested you'd taken his watch, I didn't believe it, but then he showed me evidence, a pawnbroker's ticket with your name on it." "A forgery," Wade said flatly. "Yes," the judge agreed, "as I've now discovered, but at the time it seemed convincing, and I was angry that you'd refused the match I'd arranged, which I truly believed was in your best interest." He looked at Fiona pleadingly. "Can you ever forgive me?" Fiona felt Wade's hand at the small of her back, supporting but not directing. This was her choice alone. "I don't know," she answered honestly. "What you did hurt me deeply, Father. You chose to believe the worst of me without even giving me a chance to defend myself." "I know," the judge said, his voice breaking. "And I will spend the rest of my life trying to make it up to you. Please come home. Your room is just as you left it. Everything can go back to the way it was." Fiona shook her head slowly. "No, it can't. I'm not the same person I was a month ago. I've learned what it means to stand on my own 2 feet, to earn my keep through honest work." She glanced up at Wade, drawing strength from his steady gaze. "And I've found something I never had in your house: true respect and affection." The judge's eyes narrowed as he looked at Wade. "Mr. Keller, I understand my daughter has been living at your stable these past weeks." "Working at my stable," Wade corrected calmly. "And yes, she has. You should be proud of her, Judge Nelson. She's shown more courage and dignity in the face of adversity than most men I know." The judge studied Wade for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Perhaps you're right." He turned back to Fiona. "Will you at least consider coming to Christmas dinner? The house will be empty without you." Fiona hesitated, then nodded. "I'll consider it." Outside the courthouse, snow had begun to fall, dusting the streets of Cottonwood Springs with white. Wade and Fiona walked in silence back toward the stable, their breath forming clouds in the cold air. "Did you mean what you said in there?" Wade asked finally. "About finding respect and affection?" Fiona stopped walking and turned to face him, snowflakes catching in her dark hair. "Yes," she said simply. "More than I can express." Wade took a step closer, his blue eyes intense. "Fiona, I need to tell you something. When I saw Hollister with his hands on you today, I've never been so scared in my life. Not for my own safety, but at the thought of something happening to you." He took a deep breath. "I love you. I think I started falling for you that first night when you stood in my doorway with your chin up, refusing to be broken by what life had thrown at you." Joy bloomed in Fiona's chest, warm and bright against the winter cold. "I love you too, Wade. These past weeks, working alongside you, getting to know you, it's been the most real thing I've ever experienced." Wade's gloved hands came up to frame her face. "I know I'm not the kind of man your father would have chosen for you. I don't have his wealth or position. All I can offer is a simple life, honest work, and a heart that will cherish you until the day I die." "That's all I want," Fiona whispered. "That's everything." When he kissed her, there in the falling snow with the whole town potentially watching, Fiona felt a sense of homecoming more powerful than anything she'd ever known. This man, this life, this was where she belonged. Christmas Eve found the stable transformed. Fiona had hung pine boughs and red ribbons from the rafters, and a small tree decorated with paper stars stood in the corner of their living quarters. The aroma of roasting chicken and apple pie filled the air as she put the finishing touches on their holiday meal. Wade entered, stamping snow from his boots. "Something smells amazing," he said, hanging up his coat. "Dinner's almost ready," Fiona replied, "but first I have something for you." She handed him a small package wrapped in brown paper. Inside was a finely crafted leather wallet with his initials stamped into the corner. "It's beautiful," he said, genuinely touched. "But how did you—" "I sold my mother's pearl earrings," Fiona explained. "The only valuable thing I managed to grab when I left my father's house." "I wanted you to have something special." Wade looked distressed. "Fiona, those were your mother's. I can't, they were just things," she interrupted gently. "Beautiful things, yes, but they tied me to a past I'm ready to leave behind. Besides," she added with a smile, "I kept her wedding ring." Wade's expression changed, becoming suddenly serious. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small box. "I was going to wait until after dinner, but maybe now is the right time." Fiona's heart began to race as he opened the box to reveal a simple gold band set with a small, perfect ruby. "It's not as fancy as what you're used to," he said, a hint of nervousness in his voice. "It's the most beautiful ring I've ever seen," Fiona whispered, meaning every word. Wade took her hand in his. "Fiona Nelson, when you came into my life, you turned everything upside down in the best possible way. These past weeks with you have shown me what it means to truly share your life with someone." He took a deep breath. "I can't promise you'll never face hardship again, but I can promise this. If you'll have me as your husband, you'll never walk alone again. Every step you take, I'll be right beside you. Every burden you carry, I'll help shoulder. Every joy you experience, I'll celebrate with you." His blue eyes held hers, filled with love and hope. "Will you marry me?" Tears of happiness spilled down Fiona's cheeks. "Yes," she said, her voice strong and clear. "With all my heart, yes." As Wade slipped the ring onto her finger, a knock sounded at the stable door. Fiona wiped her eyes and went to answer it, Wade close behind her. Judge Nelson stood on the threshold, snow dusting his shoulders and hat. Behind him, a servant held several packages. "Father," Fiona said, surprised, "I thought we were meeting tomorrow for dinner." "We are," the judge replied, looking uncharacteristically uncertain. "But I wanted to bring these tonight." He gestured to the packages. "Christmas presents and some of your things from home, things I thought you might miss." Fiona stepped back, silently inviting him in. The judge entered, eyeing Wade warily before noticing the ring glinting on his daughter's finger. "I see congratulations are in order," he said stiffly. "Yes," Fiona confirmed, moving to stand beside Wade, their shoulders touching. "Wade has asked me to be his wife, and I've accepted." The judge was silent for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then, to Fiona's astonishment, he extended his hand to Wade. "Mr. Keller," he said formally, "it seems I owe you a debt I can never repay. When I failed my daughter utterly, you were there to offer her shelter and respect." He swallowed hard. "I can see in her eyes that she loves you, and if you feel the same for her, then I have no right to stand in the way of her happiness." Wade shook the judge's hand firmly. "I do love her, sir, more than I can say." The judge nodded, then turned to Fiona. "I don't expect your forgiveness to come easily or quickly, my dear. But I hope that in time, you might allow me to be part of your life again, and perhaps part of the family you and Mr. Keller will build together." Fiona felt Wade's arm slip around her waist, steady and supportive. "I'd like that, Father," she said softly. As they shared their Christmas Eve meal, the table hastily expanded to include the judge. Fiona looked around at the simple, warm room that had become her home. Outside, snow continued to fall, blanketing Cottonwood Springs in pristine white, a symbol of new beginnings. Her father's rejection had sent her stumbling into the darkness, but in that darkness, she had found Wade Keller. And just as he had promised, she would never walk alone again. 3 months later, As spring brought new life to the Colorado mountains, Fiona Nelson became Fiona Keller in a simple ceremony in the town church. The entire community turned out for the wedding, their earlier judgment replaced by respect for the couple who had faced adversity with grace and determination. Judge Nelson gave his daughter away with tears in his eyes, and if the town gossips noted that the bride's waistline was already showing signs of expansion, they kept their whispers kind. After all, a new life was something to be celebrated, especially in a town that had seen its share of hardship. As Wade and Fiona exchanged their vows, their words echoed the promise he had made on that snowy Christmas Eve. To walk through life together, sharing its joys and burdens, never alone again. And they kept that promise, through all the years that followed through the expansion of their business into one of the largest horse breeding operations in Colorado, through the birth of their 3 children, through drought and prosperity, sorrow and joy. They faced it all together, hand in hand, stride for stride. Just as he'd promised, she never walked alone again.